The sun rose lazily over evergreen hills, casting a golden glow on the cobblestone streets of the quiet suburb. Nathaniel Carter, a tall man in his mid-50s, stepped out of his modest home, briefcase in hand and purpose in his stride. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that complemented his polished demeanor, he exuded quiet confidence. It was an ordinary morning, or so he thought. The air was crisp, and the neighborhood hummed with faint sounds of life. Distant dog barks, the soft clink of coffee cups, and the occasional rush of a car passing by. Nathaniel had always appreciated mornings like this, where the world seemed calm, if only for a moment. As he turned the corner toward the main road, his eyes caught an elderly woman at a bus stop. Her small frame hunched under the weight of heavy grocery bags, her fingers trembling as she struggled to lift them onto the bench. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Setting his briefcase down, he crossed the street. "Let me help you with that," he said, his voice warm but steady. The woman looked up, startled for a moment, before a wave of relief softened her features. "Thank you, young man," she whispered, her voice shaky but heartfelt. Her weathered hands released the bags, and her watery eyes glistened with gratitude. Nathaniel smiled, carefully arranging the groceries on the bench. "It's no trouble," he replied, brushing a light layer of dust from his hands. He noticed the faint sheen of tears in her eyes and felt a gentle swell of warmth in his chest. It was these small moments, these acts of kindness, that reminded him of the goodness he believed could thrive in the world, even when it often seemed buried beneath cynicism and prejudice. As he adjusted his suit and prepared to continue his journey, the low hum of a police cruiser pulled his attention. The car slowed to a crawl. Its driver, an officer in his early 30s, fixing Nathaniel with a piercing glare. At first, Nathaniel thought little of it, but the intensity of the officer's gaze lingered, heavy and intrusive, cutting through the morning tranquility like a sharp blade. Nathaniel's steps faltered slightly, but he forced himself to continue, his grip tightening on the handle of his briefcase. His calm exterior belied a rising unease. Something about the officer's demeanor unsettled him, a silent warning that this morning was about to take a dark and unexpected turn. The police station loomed like a fortress of cold indifference as Nathaniel was ushered through its doors, his wrists still bound in unforgiving cuffs. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting harsh reflections off the polished floors. Nathaniel had always considered himself a man of unwavering composure, but in this moment, humiliation tightened around him like a noose. The arresting officer, Officer Bradley, as Nathaniel overheard, strutted ahead, radiating arrogance. He didn't just hold authority, he reveled in it. "Got another one for you," Bradley called out smugly to a desk clerk as they passed. Nathaniel was led to a wooden bench, its surface worn and splintered, and shoved down unceremoniously. The cuffs bit into his wrists, leaving angry red marks against his skin. Nathaniel kept his gaze steady, though his pulse thundered in his ears. Across the room, Bradley began rifling through Nathaniel's briefcase. "What's this?" he sneered, upending the neatly organized documents onto a nearby desk. Papers fluttered to the floor, court filings, legal briefs, evidence of the important meeting Nathaniel had been en route to attend. Bradley smirked, leaning over to inspect them with feigned curiosity. "Courthouse, huh?" Bradley said, his voice laced with disbelief. "What, you a lawyer or something?" Nathaniel inhaled deeply, reining in his anger. "Yes, I am," he replied evenly, his tone calm despite the fire building in his chest. Bradley scoffed, gesturing dismissively. "Sure you are, and I'm the mayor." The mockery in his voice was met with scattered chuckles from other officers nearby, their indifference cutting deeper than their words. Nathaniel's frustration churned beneath the surface, but he held his composure. Losing his temper here would only feed their narrative. Years of navigating systemic bias had taught him that dignity was often his most powerful weapon. Hours dragged by in a haze of indignity. Fingerprinting, mugshots, a stream of questions framed less as inquiries and more as accusations. The other officers barely concealed their assumptions, whispering as they passed. "Too dressed up for a petty thief," one muttered. "Probably laundering money," another speculated. Nathaniel sat quietly through it all. His silence a sharp contrast to the chaos around him. His mind raced with questions. How far will this go? How can this be happening? Yet beneath the storm of thoughts, a steady resolve took root. They didn't know who he was, yet, but they would soon. When Bradley finally informed him that he'd be held overnight to appear before a judge in the morning, Nathaniel nodded curtly. He met the officer's mocking gaze with one of his own, calm and unshaken. "You're in for quite a surprise," Nathaniel thought, a flicker of determination igniting in his chest. As he was led to the holding cell, the cold metal bars felt less like confinement and more like the prelude to a reckoning he would soon deliver. The holding cell was small and barren, its walls an impersonal gray that seemed to leach the color from everything inside. Nathaniel sat on a cold metal bench, his back straight despite the discomfort. The air was damp and heavy, the faint scent of bleach doing little to mask the deeper stench of despair embedded in the room. He glanced around at the other occupants, some asleep, others quietly staring into the void. None of them acknowledged him, and he preferred it that way. His focus remained sharp, his mind replaying the events of the morning like a haunting refrain. I was on my way to the courthouse, he thought, anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. Helping an elderly woman is now suspicious behavior. The absurdity of it all would have been laughable if not for the suffocating reality of his situation. The officer's words and smirks lingered in his memory like an acrid taste. The humiliation of being treated as less than a man, as less than a person, gnawed at his resolve. He thought of his father, a man who had marched for civil rights in his youth, who had instilled in Nathaniel the importance of standing tall in the face of injustice. Never let them break your spirit, his father had once said. Those words echoed now, grounding him. A sudden noise, a door slamming shut, broke through his thoughts. An officer strode past, throwing him a fleeting glance before continuing on. Nathaniel's gaze followed him briefly before returning to his hands, still raw from the cuffs. He clenched his fists, the sting of the metal a bitter reminder of his situation. Hours dragged by. Requests for a phone call were ignored. Time seemed to crawl, the minutes stretching endlessly as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Despite his outward calm, Nathaniel's mind raced. He wasn't worried about the charges. They were baseless and would crumble in court. No, what troubled him was the ease with which his humanity had been disregarded, the casual cruelty of the system. As the night deepened, Nathaniel leaned back against the cold wall, exhaling slowly. His frustration gave way to determination. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about exposing the injustice for what it was. He closed his eyes, blocking out the sterile walls around him. Tomorrow he would face the court, and the truth would be revealed. For now, he allowed himself a brief moment of rest, his resolve as unyielding as the bars that surrounded him. They'll see who I am soon enough, he thought, his lips pressing into a firm line. And they'll regret underestimating me. The courthouse stood tall against the early morning sky, its grandeur casting long shadows across the pavement. Nathaniel Carter, shackled and flanked by two officers, walked through its grand doors with his head held high. The clinking of the chains around his wrists echoed in the quiet corridors, a harsh reminder of the injustice he had endured. His tailored suit, now wrinkled from a sleepless night, still clung to him as a symbol of his dignity, a silent statement that he was not what they assumed. Inside the courtroom, murmurs rippled through the audience as Nathaniel was led to the defendant's table. People whispered behind cupped hands, their curious gazes darting toward him. A few staff members recognized him, their eyes widening in disbelief. What is he doing here? Their expressions seemed to ask. The arresting officer, Bradley, sat smugly near the prosecutor's bench, his arms crossed and a self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. He looked ready to bask in his perceived triumph, convinced he had outsmarted Nathaniel. Nathaniel met Bradley's gaze, calm but unyielding, as if to say, "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "All rise," called the bailiff as the judge entered the courtroom. The room stilled, a heavy hush falling over the crowd. Judge Ellen Markham, a sharp-eyed woman with an air of authority, took her seat behind the towering bench. She adjusted her glasses and glanced over the paperwork before her. Nathaniel watched as her expression shifted subtly, her brows furrowing in confusion. Then, with a slight gasp, she straightened in her chair, her tone carrying an edge of incredulity. "Mr. Nathaniel Carter," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "State Prosecutor for the Commonwealth." A stunned silence followed her words, broken only by the faint, disbelieving whispers of the crowd. All eyes darted to Nathaniel, who stood tall, his composure unshaken. Bradley's face turned ashen, his smirk fading into a slack-jawed expression of panic. The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Officer Bradley, am I to understand that you arrested one of the most prominent legal figures in the state for suspicious behavior and resisting arrest?" Her tone was sharp, each word a blade cutting through Bradley's bravado. The courtroom buzzed with the weight of the revelation. Nathaniel said nothing, letting the gravity of the moment speak for itself. This was the beginning of a reckoning, one that would not be easily forgotten. The tension in the courtroom thickened as Judge Markham's words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Officer Bradley, who moments ago had been brimming with confidence, now seemed to shrink under the weight of her gaze. His hands fidgeted on the table, his jaw tightening as if he were bracing himself for impact. Nathaniel Carter remained silent, his posture straight and dignified. This was his moment, but he knew better than to let anger dictate his actions. The truth would speak louder than anything he could say in this instant. "Mr. Carter," the judge addressed him, her voice steady but tinged with outrage. "Please, walk us through the events of yesterday morning." Nathaniel nodded, rising to his feet. Every movement he made was deliberate, measured, the embodiment of composure. He looked across the room, his gaze sweeping over the audience, Bradley, and finally the judge. Then, in a voice that carried both precision and passion, he recounted the story. "I was on my way to the courthouse," Nathaniel began, his voice calm but resonant. "I noticed an elderly woman struggling with her groceries at a bus stop. I helped her as any decent person would. Moments later, Officer Bradley approached me, accusing me of suspicious behavior without any cause or justification." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "I complied fully, despite the baseless accusations. Yet I was handcuffed, humiliated, and paraded through my community as though I were a criminal." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Judge Markham raised a hand to silence them, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burning with intensity. "Do you have any evidence to support this?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Nathaniel gestured toward his lawyer, who presented surveillance footage from a nearby storefront and a statement from the elderly woman he had helped. The video played, showing Nathaniel's kindness and Bradley's unwarranted aggression. The judge's face darkened as she watched. When the video ended, she turned her piercing gaze toward Bradley. "Officer, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Bradley stammered, his arrogance replaced by desperation. I thought he was acting suspiciously, Your Honor. I was just doing my job." "Your job," the judge echoed, her voice icy, "does not include abusing your authority or making baseless arrests. Your conduct in this case is deeply troubling." She turned back to Nathaniel. "Mr. Carter, the court owes you an apology. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, and I will be ordering a full investigation into Officer Bradley's actions." The room buzzed with whispers again, but Nathaniel stood still, his face calm but his chest swelling with a quiet sense of vindication. Justice was being served, not just for him but as a reminder that abuse of power would not go unchecked. As the judge adjourned the session, Nathaniel sat back down, his fists unclenching. Bradley slumped in his seat, pale and visibly shaken. This wasn't just a reckoning for the officer. It was a warning to everyone watching. Actions have consequences, and justice, though sometimes slow, has a way of finding its voice. The courtroom emptied slowly, the tension from the morning's proceedings lingering in the air like an aftershock. Nathaniel Carter stood at the defense table, collecting his scattered belongings with steady hands. Each item he returned to his briefcase, a legal brief here, a photograph of his family there, felt like reclaiming a part of himself that the previous day had tried to strip away. The judge's final words still echoed in his mind. This kind of behavior is unacceptable. Justice had been served in that room, but Nathaniel knew the fight extended far beyond its walls. A small crowd gathered outside the courthouse steps, their murmurs rising as Nathaniel emerged into the sunlight. Journalists, curious onlookers, and a few familiar faces formed a loose semicircle, their expressions ranging from outrage to admiration. An older man approached him, his weathered face etched with both sorrow and pride. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice trembling, "thank you for standing up to this. My son went through something similar, but he didn't have the chance to clear his name." Nathaniel placed a hand on the man's shoulder, his heart heavy. "I'm sorry for what your son endured," he said softly. "No one should have to face this kind of injustice." Nearby, the elderly woman from the bus stop stood, her frail hands clutching a small purse. She stepped forward cautiously, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm so glad they listened to you. It's not right what they did." Nathaniel smiled at her, the warmth of her presence a reminder of why he had stopped to help in the first place. "Thank you for speaking up," he said. "Your courage made all the difference." As reporters closed in with cameras and microphones, Nathaniel raised a hand, signaling for quiet. He addressed the crowd, his voice firm but composed. "This isn't just about me," he began. "It's about every person who has faced prejudice and injustice, who didn't have the chance to fight back. Today's outcome is a step in the right direction, but it's only one step. We must demand accountability, fairness, and dignity for everyone." The crowd erupted in applause, their support a powerful reminder of the broader fight ahead. Nathaniel stood for a moment, letting their energy wash over him before stepping down the courthouse stairs. Each step felt lighter than the last, the weight of the previous day lifting with every stride. As he walked away from the courthouse, the sunlight warming his face, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a larger battle. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace. Justice had prevailed today, and that was worth celebrating. The courthouse faded into the distance as Nathaniel Carter walked down the sunlit street. The morning air, once heavy with tension, now felt fresh and liberating. Yet, the echoes of the day's events lingered in his mind, reminding him that this moment wasn't just a personal victory. It was a responsibility. He stopped at a park bench under a sprawling oak tree and sat down, letting the hum of the city envelop him. Children laughed as they played nearby, their voices a poignant reminder of the future he hoped to shape, a future where their innocence wouldn't be marred by prejudice or fear. Nathaniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out the photograph he had tucked away earlier. It was of his late father, standing proudly on the steps of a courthouse during the civil rights movement. His father's words came to him now, clear and unwavering. "Son, it's not enough to rise above injustice. You have to challenge it, so others can rise too." The events of the past 24 hours had revealed just how far society still had to go. For every victory like his, countless others suffered in silence, their voices unheard and their dignity stripped away. Nathaniel's fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant, a reminder of the meetings and obligations awaiting him. The governor's office wanted a statement, advocacy groups were requesting interviews, and his colleagues were eager to show their support. Nathaniel sighed, not with frustration, but with resolve. This newfound attention wasn't a burden, it was an opportunity. Rising from the bench, he made his way toward his next destination, the courthouse, a distant silhouette behind him. His steps were deliberate, his gaze steady. He wasn't walking away from the fight, he was walking toward it, more determined than ever. As he passed by a group of teenagers lounging on the grass, one of them recognized him. "Hey, isn't that the guy from the news?" the boy whispered to his friends. Nathaniel caught their glances, offering them a slight nod and a warm smile. He hoped they saw in him not just a man who had triumphed over adversity, but someone who was fighting for a world where they wouldn't have to. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Nathaniel welcomed the challenge. He carried with him the weight of his community's hopes and the strength of those who had come before him. Justice wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And as long as injustice existed, Nathaniel Carter would keep walking, one step at a time, toward a brighter, fairer future. For now, the sun shone warmly on his back, and that was enough. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.